everybody, Wayne here. In today's overview and review, I am taking a look at Storm Over Jerusalem, the Roman Siege, designed by Scott Blanton and published by Multiman Publishing. Storm Over Jerusalem is a two-player area impulse wargame that uses cards to assist with actions in combat. In this game, you play as either the Romans or the Judean factions during the Siege of Jerusalem that occurred in 70 AD when future Roman Emperor Titus led the Roman legions against a Jewish revolt. The Judean player is trying to outlast the Romans, while the Roman player will be assaulting the walls of Jerusalem, and defenders within attempting to capture and hold two VP locations. Let's do a quick overview. I have an in-depth tutorial of turn 1 for a closer look at the game. I'll cover my pros and cons, and one with my final thoughts. All right, let's get on the table. All right, so here I have the map laid out with the initial starting setup. This game is played out over 8 turns. During those 8 turns, each side will draw a hand of cards determined by a number on the turn track. So the number of cards each turn you'll have will change. Also with control of 2 areas that grant bonus cards. You will use those cards during the impulse phase, which comes after the draw phase. Each side will have alternating impulses. Always starts with the Romans each turn. So as a Roman player, when you start, you can conduct an impulse action, which is something as simple as activating an area and then activating whatever fresh units are in there for movement, attack, or assault. You can play a card. You can play it for the event, or you can discard it to use it for either, if you are the Romans, building a siege tower, or the Judeans for repairing a wall section, or you can pass. The Romans, if they pass, the Judean player has to discard a card, and then they can play out their impulse. If they're unable to or don't want to, and they pass as well, the turn then ends early. During the impulse, and it's just back and forth again, this is an area impulse, area movement game, right? So each side goes. When you're activating areas for movement, you're focusing on an attack and assault. You're focusing on areas where there are fresh units. In addition, you have your cards that are going to grant special abilities, special things you can do. For instance, for the Romans here, you can see this card has a 2 here in the corner in a circle. That means they can discard it to build a siege tower with a 2 strength. The siege tower, when it is in an area with Roman units, and the Romans are assaulting across the lines, the walls of Jerusalem here, it is going to grant them the ability to reduce the Judean wall strength. Now, a key thing to remember here in this game, so when you are, as a Roman player, assaulting across the walls, you cannot move across them, assuming that there are Judean units in the other area. You will have to conduct an assault. The walls themselves can be reduced over time. When you're conducting assaults, if you're able to cause damage points, and we'll cover combat in a second, it will then reduce the strength of the wall accordingly. If the wall has ever been breached, you can move across it freely. But in the meantime, as you're playing, remember the Judean player may be able to use their cards and maybe spending them to rebuild wall sections. In addition, like I said before, there's going to be all kinds of special events, right? For instance, the Judean card here plays part of your impulse. The Roman player must randomly discard 2 cards from their hand. Things are going to affect combat. The Roman card we were just looking at. For impulse, select a Roman control area, conduct a 4 firepower attack, which we'll cover in a second, ignoring the wall modifier against an adjacent area, or damage an adjacent wall section, roll 1d6, and then it'll see, are you damaging that wall, depending on what you roll, by how much. Combat itself, very simple. It's very attack-centric. So what that means is that it favors attackers in the sense that the attackers never suffer losses. So you will look at an area and say the Romans here are in area 2 and they are conducting an assault into area 14. They have to do an assault because there is an intact wall section here, is +4. By the way, when they get reduced, you will have different markers like these to reduce them down. So if it starts off at +4, +3, +2, +1, and then finally they are breached. The attackers are going to go ahead and add up the attack strength of each of the attacking units, whoever you're sending on the attack itself, or on the assault, I should say. You add up those strength points. You're then going to roll 2d6, add that to it. Remember any cards, because there are going to be cards that you can play that will help you with combat, either as the attacker or the defender. You're going to add up the attacker's strength points. For the defending Judeans here, or potentially, right, the Judeans will launch attacks against the Romans, but for the defending player, you would look at one unit. So the defender would pick one unit, and they want to rely on their defense strength, which is the number in the middle. Or if a unit is on its spent side, it's just going to be the only number. So units have attack, defense, movement. When they're fresh, they have all three. When they're on their spent side, all they can do is defend. They're not going to be moving or conducting attacks, obviously. So you would check that number, and you would pick whichever one you wanted as the defender, probably going to pick the highest one. You're going to pick that number. You're going to add the defensive value of the terrain, which you can see there are the areas on the exterior of the wall are for the most part green, like a light green. Those are +1 defensive value. The yellow area with a slightly thicker line around it is +2. And finally, these orange areas in the middle with the thicker line are +3. You're going to add that defense strength. You're going to add any terrain modifiers. And then if there's an attack wall section that's being assaulted across, you're going to add that to it as well. You're going to compare the attack and defense totals. And whatever, if there's a differential favoring the attacker, then the defender will now have to assign damage points to their defending units. If any damage points are assigned and there is an assault across a attack wall, it'll be reduced by 1. If there is no differential, so say, or if the differential favors the defender, say the attacker ends up with a total of 12 and the defender had a total of 13, which is just an example. That's not these correct numbers here. It's okay for the attacker. They don't suffer any losses. The attacker never suffers losses in combat, barring any sort of cards that I'm not familiar with. So that's why when I said the combat system is very attack-centric. Okay, so your alternating impulses, right? You're activating areas. For the Romans, you are primarily, right, attacking and trying to move in. For the Judean player, you are primarily just defending, reinforcing areas that are weaker, just trying to keep the Romans outside of the walls. There's really going to be the wall section here, and then there's going to be sort of an intersection here. Obviously, you can attack through here, but certain areas you can't have siege engines. You can see the graphic printed on the board here with the line through it showing, hey, you can't build a siege engine in those areas. You can build them in these areas here. The siege towers. Also, there are siege ramps that allow you to completely bypass, allow the Roman player, I should say, to completely bypass the wall section and get into the areas inside the city. Okay, so like I said, you are alternating impulses back and forth. Finally, you're done. You've run out of fresh units. You run out of cards. The Roman player passed, then the Judean player was unable to discard. Whatever it is, the turn ends. You're going to be doing a few things. You're going to be checking for a Judean supply restriction, which it's printed on the board. It's also printed on the player aids. Basically, that is saying that every turn, and then it goes up over time, you're going to be rolling to see if the Judeans start running out of supplies. It gets easier and easier for them to run out of supplies. When they're out of supplies, they're going to take out of supply markers, and they're going to put it on areas with spent units. Those areas with spent units, which these are all fresh, but imagine they're flipped over and they're spent, they will not refresh at the end of this end phase. Just shows that over time the Judeans were running out of supplies as they were besieged, virtually completely by the Romans. After that, you're going to refresh any units that are able to be refreshed. You are going to, the Roman player can take any siege towers off the map if they want to, simply because the siege towers that comes in the game, they're limited by counters that are in the game, so you may want to remove them from one area so you can move them somewhere else or deploy them somewhere else. You're going to check for control of areas 27 and 22. You can see they have nice little VP markers on there. If the Roman player ever controls both at the end of a turn, they win automatically. If the Judean player controls both, they get 1 victory point for each. And then also, if the Judean player controls all of the city at the end of a turn, every city area, they're also going to gain a victory point for that. You're going to check for the Judean leaders. So, you can see the Judeans, right? They are, and obviously it was Romans red, Judeans are the blue and purple. The Judeans have 2 leaders, and these are 2 separate factions led by John and Simon. There's some limitations of them conducting combat or actions together. I'm not going to go in depth in the rules, but as part of the game, each faction has a leader. As a Judean player, you want to deploy these leaders at some point. That +2 is going to help with the attack. Remember that the top number is combat strength. Or they can be deployed to help with the defense, and they'll gain a +2 on defense. If they are not deployed to an area at the end of a turn, and you're in the end phase, for every leader not deployed to the map, the Roman player is going to get a victory point. You're running through, you're checking victory points, you're checking for that automatic victory, refreshing as you can. Okay. Also, the Roman is going to get 6 units, depending, can be modified by cards, out of the reinforcement zones. So there's the actual right areas kind of in the center of the map. You can see area from area 1 kind of wraps around all the way up to area 30. However, on the outside, you see zone A, B, C, and D. Those are reinforcement zones. The Judean player could never enter them or anything. However, every turn, the Roman player will get 6, or approximately, units that gets to deploy them into adjacent zones, or excuse me, areas from the zones, and they can then use them on his attacks. At the end of turn 8, assuming the Roman player has not captured areas 27 and 22 for the automatic victory, basically you're going to go ahead and compare victory points and see who wins the game. It's a two-handed game. You got hands of cards. It's a lot of back and forth. Hopefully I've explained it well enough. I do have, like I said, that turn 1 tutorial. I think I do an even better job explaining it, and you actually get to see an entire turn in play. So if you're interested in it, you want to know more before I go into my pros and cons and final thoughts, please watch that video. Otherwise, let's do that and move on to my pros and cons. All right, my first con, it may not even be a negative for you, but if you've played any of the Storm Over games before, this game will feel more like an evolution than a revolution. You know, there's a lot to like about Storm Over Jerusalem, which I'll get to later, but I do believe it's worth noting that at its core, the game is definitely built on a system that is now decades old. On the other hand, if you've never played this style of game, or a game with this system before, this area impulse system, you're in for a treat. My second issue is I do wish there was a way to play a shorter game. The game kind of gives the impression of being fast-paced because of the back and forth, and some turns can go by quickly, but there are a lot of areas, right? There's 30 areas, there's a lot of units, and there's 2 hands of cards to work through each turn. It gives you a lot of choice and variety in the game, but the downside is it does take time to resolve everything. For me, to sit and play out an entire game, it was too long to do in one sitting. I found myself breaking up my games into 2 or more sessions. I'd love a shorter scenario that, ends halfway through, maybe by checking and comparing VPs, maybe by giving the Roman player, X number of areas he has to capture to show progress. I don't know exactly. I just wish it was an option. Okay, that's it for the cons. On to the pros. First off, I enjoy the look of this one on the table. Well, the map doesn't, completely wow you, right? It doesn't jump off the table. I think it looks really good. And even more important, it's clear and easy to read at a glance. I can see the different areas. I can see the area control markers. I can see, which you get bonus ones, by the way. So you can either place them down or you can leave the printed ones on there and then just place them when an area changes control. Same when the Romans capture an area, which I really like. The map segments, the +4s, are a little light. But you know that if there's nothing there, it's automatically a +4. And then later on, right, you get these chits that definitely stand out, +1, +2, +3. So no problems there either. The area lines are clear. It's all solid lines, but then dotted lines here. I don't know, just everything looks really crisp and clean. The component quality itself, it ranges from decent to excellent. The counters, they're a little on the thinner side. You can check that out in my recon unboxing video. But that is made up for with the combat units all being 3/4 inch, a welcome surprise for an MMP game. So it's maybe kind of hard to tell on the board here, but when you actually look at the units themselves and you have them, in your hand or you're looking at them on a board here, you have a 5/8 inch counter and then you have the 3/4 inch. It is a really nice, hefty counter, at least in the size sense. The game map is paper and average quality, but the game also comes with 2 player aids and a full color rules manual with plenty of pictures and examples of play. The game was easier to learn and easier to play thanks to those. And finally, these cards are just beautiful. They're a nice linen finish, they're very high quality, and there's a lot of beautiful artwork on them. Overall, I was very happy with the components and with the art style of this game. Second, I love the combat system with the addition of the siege towers, siege ramps, all this stuff you have. You have the regular combat system, and then you're building siege ramps, you're creating siege towers, they're moving with your Roman units, you're placing them in areas, you're helping you attack them. They are being assaulted by the Judeans. You build a siege ramp, your Judeans are getting an opportunity to try to destroy it before you can even use it. It's just a lot of little bits of chrome. That's a lot to the game. Obviously, siege engines, the walls of Jerusalem, they were all a huge part of this particular battle. Not only does it show how tenacious the Judean defenders were and how hard they fought, it also demonstrates both the engineering skill and the will of the Roman army. In this game, the Roman player is constantly building siege equipment to use or playing tactical cards that feature, abstracted equipment like catapults and scorpions. Meanwhile, the Judeans are using their cards to, among other actions, rebuild sections of the damaged wall, etc. It's such a simple yet effective system that adds very little chrome for a big payoff. Third, the supply system for the Judeans is thematic, a great mechanism, and heartbreaking. The Roman player is striving to choke off the Judean player from supplies, reducing the Judean player's ability to refresh spent units. This creates a snowball effect. There are also those two areas I mentioned that provide bonus cards each turn. They begin under Judean control, but the Romans can and probably will capture one or both of those areas, which further limits the Judean player. As soon as the walls begin falling, the Judeans begin to feel the siege tightening around them. Fourth, although this is a two-player wargame with hands of cards for both sides, it solos surprisingly well. The main reason I found that to be true is the more static nature of the Judean defender. Yes, they can launch counterattacks, and they should. And yes, there are reaction cards that you play in response to your opponent, so the game does require an ability to be detached from both sides, and you have to play two-handed. But the Judean player is on the defensive and has to be more careful with their limited manpower, meaning they naturally play a bit more passive. I'm the first one to tell you when a game just isn't fun solitaire. And I'm happy to say this one does provide a rewarding experience playing it solo. And as a bit of a potential future bonus, the designer Scott Blanton is currently working on a solitaire bot that manages the Judean side. I've been fortunate enough to tinker with it, and there is a lot of potential there. I hope it sees a light of day, especially in a professionally printed form. Finally, the game feels very balanced. There are aspects of the design that seem like they could go either way from the very beginning of a new game. And I don't normally talk about other people's reviews or thoughts about a game, but I wanted to mention them here. I saw a number of people online claiming one side or another seemed to be overpowered, and that they didn't understand how the other side could possibly win. But the funny thing is, I saw those comments for both the Judeans, they seem invincible behind their walls, or the Romans. They have so many units they can swamp the Judeans. That tells me that if you play the game multiple times and try different strategies, both sides have the potential to win. And that's certainly been my experience. All right, that's it from my pros and cons. Let's end with my final thoughts. Storm over Jerusalem has quickly become one of my favorite area impulse wargames. Scott Blanton has crafted a tight design that plays exceptionally well no matter which side you are focused on. Although the Romans have more ability to maneuver and engage in assaults, more frequently, that is the nature of a siege. The game does a tremendous job showing what a grindingly slow operation it must have been for the Roman legionaries as they slowly broke down the walls of Jerusalem, using siege engines, siege ramps, and towers, and just the manpower of 4 legions. Yet, through the gameplay, you can also feel the frantic desire of the Judeans to hold back the Romans, to make them fight for every step. Romans who, to the Judeans, must have seemed like a truly unstoppable force of imperial power. If you want to know more about this conflict, I can recommend 2 resources. One touches briefly on it, but for what it does a good job, and it's just a great book overall, and that is Pax, War and Peace in Rome's Golden Age by Tom Holland. If you know any of Tom Holland's previous works on the Romans, you know how excellent this one is going to be, and it really is. Second, for a more focused book, check out Roman Jerusalem, The Clash of Ancient Civilizations by Martin Goodman. It's really more focused on the conflicts between Rome and Jerusalem, and if that's what you want, then this should be your go-to. It's not a short book, but it is rich in history. I found both of those resources to be excellent sources of information concerning this battle and the history behind it. All right, thank you to everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review. Please let me know what you think of my video and this game in the comments below. And until next time, everyone, later.